I remember teaching film theory to some students a few years ago. One of the countless subjects somehow I've ended up teaching. And I remember trying to explain to uh, one person that he would understand film better if he switched off the sound. And I'd been told this years and years earlier, and it served me very well. And uh, I went to see Snow White. I confess, I'm really sorry. And I saw it in Turkish. So I might just as well have switched off the sound because my Turkish isn't good enough to follow conversations. And so what I saw was the raw edit, just the edit, the film, the camera movements, the the montage, and so on. And it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. When you move the camera, you want to go from point of interest to an through another point of interest to the point of interest you're looking at. So if I want to move my camera to John over there, I would find something on the way to focus on. There's nothing. There's nothing, and it's ugly. There is one scene which is gorgeous, which is the little animals. But I mean, that had already been done gorgeously in a cartoon. So let's begin with the thunderingly obvious premise that somehow escapes the boardrooms of Burbank. Not every fairy tale needs retelling. Some, in fact, might be best left alone, like ancient artifacts whose potency diminishes when dragged into the fluorescent light of modern marketing. Yet here we are in the year 2025, enduring a $270 million live action remake of Snow White that somehow manages to be inert, incoherent, and insulting to both the source material and the intelligence of its audience. You remember how there was a sort of Snow White tribute a few years ago in, I think, the Oscars, and it was so cack-handed it ruined the careers of the choreographer, the producer, and the star of that series. Snow White. When you have a film which is perfect, Eisenstein said it was a perfect film. When you have a film which is perfect, then you tamper with it, and you spoil it. It's your danger. When Disney re-released it, I think in the 1970s, and added the soup drinking scene or something, that minute or so lengthened the dwarf stuff to such a point that it was unwatchable, because the dwarf antics are the most boring bit of the film, and yet that was the bit that the animators seem to enjoy doing. Well, because animators are indulgent. They spend all their time, I know, I am one, they spend all their time focusing on 1/24th of a second. It's not surprising we become obsessive. So why should we not meddle with what works? Uh, I think there are reasons for art and for storytelling, and this lumbering CGI drenched curiosity exists chiefly for one reason only, and that's copyright extension. The original 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is about to slip into the public domain. So Disney, ever the intellectual property hoarder, must now tie up the characters and songs in fresh red tape by reintroducing them under a new legal wrapper. It's less about storytelling than about story owning. And what a grim irony that a tale first told by the Brothers Grimm, a work soaked in archetype and ancient wisdom, has been flattened into a mall-ready mishmash with a narrative momentum of a dying Roomba. So, addressing the basics, the camera moves without rhythm or purpose. I think that's the most important thing, and nobody seems to have mentioned that in their reviews. The world it conjures looks less like a fairy tale and more like a mid-tier streaming fantasy set, plasticky and drab with puffy sleeves as character development. Snow White, played by the competent but charisma-neutral Rachel Zegler, is now less an ingenue in the woods and more a sort of corporate HR intern doing outreach in the forest. Her mission, not to find love or herself, but to lead, presumably by committee. Gal Gadot, who could have feasted on the role of the evil queen, instead delivers a performance with all the menace of a mildly vexed air stewardess. I mean, she purses, she pouts, she sings, in a way, and then she peters out. It's all villainy as pantomime. Lots of P's here. And that's really it. I mean, it's P all over the place. All gloss, no poison. It's the one P which is missing is perfection. The real villain here isn't the evil queen. It's the film's confusion about its own identity. Is this feminist revisionism or a nostalgia trip? Is this kiss romantic or predatory? Are the dwarves CGI illusions or socio-political stand-ins? No one seems quite sure about any of this, least of all the filmmakers. In trying to anticipate and neutralise every possible backlash, Disney has produced a movie that says and means absolutely nothing. I do recommend that you see it in another language. It makes it slightly more enjoyable. I wasn't bored because I was busy struggling to work out what on earth was going on. But I wasn't entertained in any way. Indeed, it's hard to think of a better metaphor for late-stage franchise filmmaking than Snow White, a film that mirrors, a film about mirrors that that itself reflects nothing of consequence. In their attempt to modernize the story, the creators have jettisoned all the psychological weight that made Snow White enduring in the first place. Which brings us to Bruno Bettelheim. Who knew in the uses of enchantment that these stories serve a purpose beyond mere diversion? Fairy tales, he argued, help children confront the terrors of growing up. Snow White is not a tale of sweetness and song. It's a brutal tale about jealousy, morality, and sexual awakening. The dwarves are symbols of childish stasis. The stepmother, a projection of maternal ambivalence. The poisoned apple is knowledge. The glass coffin is suspended adolescence. And the kiss, yes, that kiss, is the ambiguous threshold into adulthood. And none of this survives in the remake. Even the nastiness, which is what you would expect, let's say, from a story that emerges from the E.T.A. Hoffman milieu. What remains is a hollowed-out artifact that gestures towards empowerment without understanding what empowerment means. And by the way, when I mentioned E.T.A. Hoffman, the uncanny, Freud wrote a paper on the uncanny. And he used E.T.A. Hoffman as an example. The uncanny is where we live. It's where our dreams merge with reality. It's why fairy tales are so potent. And none of that is there in this. This is so bland as to be lifeless. Zegler's Snow White doesn't long for love. She wants to be a leader. Well, that's fine. You can long to be a leader. But she doesn't have leadership qualities. She isn't given the opportunity to project leadership. She comes across, if anything, as a bit of a madam, telling all the men what they should be doing, and when, with whom. What Disney offers is a legal maneuver dressed as a musical, and a bad musical at that, with songs so anodyne they might have been written by an algorithm. And perhaps that's the central tragedy of this Snow White. What was so remarkable about Disney's early films is that the songs, and we hardly know who wrote them, are so iconic that they were being used in the Second World War. The Three Little Pigs film was beloved in Russia. And in fact, Disney sent the reel of the Three Little Pigs to Russian filmmakers, I think before it was even released in America, because he knew that Russia was the bastion of development of modern animation. Russia had been refining animation before Disney even got to it, because Russia was looking at animation as a tool for propaganda. And it was brilliant. And this fairy tales can be reimagined. All you have to do is think of Angela Carter. there's a Spanish reinvention of Snow White as a silent bullfighter. I can't remember what it was. But what Disney offers is a legal maneuver. Um, is a legal maneuver and a mess. And perhaps the central tragedy of this Snow White is not that it is woke or not woke enough, but that it is soulless, and that where it should be technically brilliant, made by the greatest technicians of our day, it is technically useless. When Spielberg has this wonderful device where he moves sideways and then in, or moves in and moves out and then sideways. It's an L shape. And all the time, whenever you look at a Spielberg movie, every frame is filled with interest. There is a point of interest at every point. And in this film, there isn't even a point of interest at the beginning or the end of a shot. And there's certainly no point of interest in the middle of a shot. And these moves, the camera is just moving randomly. It is quite extraordinary. And the film grading is extraordinary as well. The forest, which should be green and luscious and welcoming, is yellow. as if it's all burnt to pieces. It's yellowing. It's like that. It's like the beginnings of summer, when any minute now a torch could come and blow the whole thing to smithereens. And that, I'm afraid, is what this director has managed to do. There are a few moments. The dwarves oddly provide some brief comic respite, but they're like crumbs in a forest, scattered, insignificant, and leading nowhere. And so I think I end not with a cheer, not with a complete rejection, but with a shrug. The original Snow White won Disney an honorary Oscar and inspired Sergei Eisenstein, not Asieni, who's a poet. I actually lived in his house, in his flat. Eisenstein called it the greatest film ever made, and I think he was wrong. I don't think it is, but certainly if you watch the original Snow White with the sound off, it is ravishing. If you put the sound on, you've got a lot of rubbish to get through because you've got to deal with all the sort of jokes about the dwarves. But the beginning, the middle, and the end of Snow White is simply gorgeous, with or without sound. And there's 2 minutes here or 2 minutes there which are injudicious, and make sure you don't watch it with the soup edit added. But the original Snow White is something. Is a great film. And even if I qualify it, it's still a great film. And I think this rubbish is a cautionary tale of what happens when stories are stripped of their symbolism, of their risk, of their truth. Fairy tales endure because they speak the unspeakable to children, not by comforting them, but by arming them. And, you know, when we think of Snow White, we now think of the Disney film. That Snow White is awakened with true love's kiss. She's not. In the Grimm's fairy tales, I think the coffin is pushed off its off its bier, and Snow White, the apple lodges in Snow White's throat, and she comes back to life. It's the Disney people who massaged the story and made it iconic. And now they've done it again, and they've made it ridiculous. The only thing this film teaches is that even the greatest tales can be turned to bilge if the brand requires it.